Today, I want to share my story, a betrayal that became an opportunity for growth and ultimately redemption. Imagine being abandoned by your own parents in a foreign country, thousands of miles from home. That was my reality. But weeks later, I returned, not as their helpless daughter, but as their superior. This isn't a movie plot. This is my journey from forgotten child to unexpected boss. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. I never thought I'd be telling this story publicly, but here we are. My name is Emily Richardson, and I've always been the odd one out in my family. My parents, Gregory and Susan Richardson, are both successful corporate lawyers who've built their careers on winning at all costs. Growing up in their Boston brownstone, I was constantly reminded that I didn't quite fit the mold they'd designed for the Richardson family image. Unlike my older brother Marcus, who followed in their footsteps at Harvard Law, I chose a different path. I studied international business at a state university, a decision that my parents viewed as settling for less. "Why aim for the middle when you could reach for the top?" my father would say during our increasingly rare family dinners. My mother would just sigh and change the subject, as if my career choice was too disappointing to discuss. Despite our differences, I always tried to maintain a relationship with them. I'd call weekly, visit during holidays, and make genuine efforts to connect. Sometimes it felt like trying to build a bridge across the Grand Canyon with popsicle sticks, exhausting and ultimately futile. But I kept trying because that's what family is supposed to do, right? Last September, my father called with an unexpected invitation. His law firm had recently expanded to include international clients, and he and my mother were planning a 2-week trip to Singapore to meet with potential business partners. To my surprise, they invited me along. "It would be good for you to see how real business is conducted on a global scale," he said, his voice carrying that familiar undertone of condescension. "Besides, your mother thinks it might be nice to have some family time." I was skeptical. Family time had never been a priority for the Richardsons. Our last vacation together had been nearly a decade ago, a disaster of a weekend at Martha's Vineyard where my parents spent more time on their phones than with their children. But something about this invitation felt different. Maybe they were finally making an effort. Maybe turning 30 had somehow elevated me in their eyes. Or maybe I was just being naive. Whatever the reason, I agreed to go. My own import-export. Business was just starting to gain traction, but it was still small enough that I could step away for 2 weeks. Besides, Singapore was an emerging market I'd been researching, and the trip could benefit my business as well. The weeks leading up to the trip were filled with my mother's detailed itineraries and my father's business briefings. They treated the family vacation like a corporate retreat, complete with scheduled activities and expected outcomes. I played along, hoping that beneath all the planning was a genuine desire to reconnect. "Emily, make sure you pack appropriately," my mother reminded me during one of our pre-trip calls. "We'll be meeting with some very important people, and appearances matter in Asian business culture." "I know, Mom. I've done business in Asia before," I replied, trying to keep the annoyance out of my voice. There was a pause on the line. "Oh, that's right. Your little import business." "Well, this is different, dear. These are high-level executives." I bit my tongue. My little import business had doubled its revenue in the past year, but in the Richardson household, success was measured by corner offices and company cars, not entrepreneurial growth. The day of our departure arrived, and we met at Logan International Airport. My parents were impeccably dressed, as always, my father in a tailored suit despite the long flight ahead, and my mother in a designer outfit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "Emily, you made it," my mother said, checking her watch. "We were beginning to think you'd missed the flight." "I'm 20 minutes early, Mom," I pointed out. "Well, in the Richardson family, early means an hour ahead," my father chimed in. "But you're here now, and that's what matters." We checked in for our connecting flights, Boston to San Francisco, then San Francisco to Singapore. It was going to be a long journey, but I'd come prepared with work documents and a new novel I'd been meaning to read. Maybe the extended travel? Time would give us a chance to talk about something other than their expectations and my supposed shortcomings. The first leg of our journey went smoothly. We landed in San Francisco with a 3-hour layover before our international flight. My father suggested we use the time to grab dinner at an upscale restaurant in the international terminal. "They have an excellent wine selection," he said, leading the way. "And we can go over the itinerary one more time." The restaurant was crowded, but my father's confident demeanor and substantial tip secured us a table with a view of the runway. As we settled in, my mother pulled out a leather-bound portfolio. "Now, Emily, we've arranged for you to join us for the first 3 days of meetings," she began, flipping through the pages. "After that, you're free to explore on your own while we handle the more sensitive negotiations." I nodded, taking a sip of the overpriced wine my father had ordered. This was typical. Include me, but only to a point. The sensitive negotiations were code for, "We don't trust you enough to be involved in the important stuff." "Actually," I said, setting down my glass, "I've been researching some local businesses in Singapore that align with my company's goals. I thought I might set up a few meetings of my own during that time." My parents exchanged a look, that familiar, silent communication that always made me feel like an outsider. "That's ambitious of you," my father finally said. "But I wouldn't want you to embarrass yourself. These are sophisticated business people who expect a certain level of experience." "Dad, I've been running my own company for 3 years now. I think I can handle a business meeting." My mother reached across the table and patted my hand condescendingly. "Of course you can, dear. It's just that in international business, relationships are everything. Your father and I have spent decades building our network. And we'd be happy to introduce you," my father added, "but perhaps in a more controlled environment. You can observe how we do things first." I felt my cheeks flush with anger and embarrassment. At 30 years old, I was being treated like an intern rather than a business owner in my own right. But I'd learned long ago that arguing with Gregory and Susan Richardson was an exercise in futility. They would never see me as their equal, not in business, and certainly not in life. "Fine," I conceded, taking another sip of wine. "I'll follow your lead." The rest of dinner passed with my parents discussing their clients and connections, occasionally asking for my input only to subtly correct or dismiss my suggestions. By the time we paid the bill, my earlier optimism about the trip had evaporated. This wasn't going to be a family bonding experience. It was going to be 2 weeks of being reminded that I didn't measure up to the Richardson standard. As we gathered our carry-on bags and prepared to head to our gate, my father's phone rang. He stepped away to take the call, his posture immediately shifting into what I called his lawyer stance, straight-backed and commanding. My mother busied herself with checking our boarding passes and travel documents. "Emily, do you have your passport readily accessible?" she asked, not looking up from her own meticulous organization. "Yes, Mom. It's in my jacket pocket along with my boarding pass." She nodded absently, her attention already shifting to my father, who was returning from his call with a troubled expression. "That was Zhang from the Singapore office," he announced, his voice low. "There's been a complication with the Westlake merger. They need additional documentation before our meeting on Monday." My mother's perfectly maintained composure faltered slightly. "But all the paperwork was filed last week. I reviewed it myself." "Apparently, there's been a change in the regulatory requirements. We need to send over the revised agreements with my signature before we land. Can't you sign them electronically?" I suggested. My father shook his head. "Not for this level of documentation. It needs to be original signatures, scanned and sent securely." My mother checked her watch. "Our flight board's in 40 minutes. Where are we going to find a business center to handle this?" "There's one near gate 93, I offered. "I saw it when we were walking to the restaurant." They should have scanning capabilities. My parents looked at me with mild surprise, as if they'd forgotten I was capable of providing useful information. Good thinking, Emily, my father admitted reluctantly. Susan, you and Emily should head to the gate. I'll take care of this and meet you there. I'll go with you, my mother immediately offered. 2 sets of eyes are better than 1 when it comes to legal documents. They both turned to me, and I knew what was coming next. Emily, be a dear and take our carry-ons to the gate, my mother said, already handing me her designer travel bag. We'll be there before boarding begins. But I started to protest. It's gate 88, my father interrupted, checking the boarding pass in his hand. We won't be long. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Before I could argue further, they were walking away, their heads bent in serious conversation about the merger complications. I stood there in the middle of the busy terminal, suddenly laden with 3 carry-on bags and a sinking feeling in my stomach. I made my way to gate 88, found seats in the waiting area, and settled in. 20 minutes passed, then 30. The gate agents announced pre-boarding for first-class passengers and those needing assistance. Still no sign of my parents. I tried calling both their phones, but neither answered. Boarding continued group by group. When they called my zone, I hesitated, unsure whether to board without them. I tried their phones again, straight to voicemail. Final boarding call for Singapore Airlines flight SQ317 to Singapore, the gate agent announced over the PA system. I approached the desk. Excuse me, my parents are also on this flight, but they had to take care of some urgent business. They should be here any minute. The gate agent checked her computer. I'm sorry, but the Richardsons have already boarded the flight. What? I stared at her in disbelief. That's impossible. I've been waiting for them here the whole time. She turned the screen slightly so I could see. Gregory and Susan Richardson, seats 2A and 2C. They boarded 20 minutes ago. My mind raced to make sense of this information. Had they somehow bypassed the main waiting area? Had they forgotten I was traveling with them? Or, the thought hit me like a physical blow. Had they deliberately boarded without me? Miss, are you Emily Richardson? The gate agent asked, checking my boarding pass. You're in seat 23F. We need to close the doors. Will you be boarding? I stood frozen, my thoughts whirling. My parents had abandoned me. They must have gone to the gate, seen I wasn't there, and boarded anyway. No calls, no texts, no effort to find me. It was perfectly in character for them, and yet so hurtful I could barely process it. Miss Richardson? The gate agent prompted again. The doors are closing. I should have boarded that plane. I should have confronted my parents during the 16-hour flight to Singapore, demanding an explanation for their behavior. But in that moment, something inside me snapped. A lifetime of trying to earn their approval, of being dismissed and underestimated, of never being quite good enough. No, I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt. I won't be boarding. The gate agent looked surprised but nodded. All right, what about your parents' bags? She gestured to the carry-ons at my feet. I looked down at the expensive luggage my parents had entrusted to me, designer bags containing their laptops, tablets, and all the documents for their precious business meetings. They'll have to manage. Without them, I said, leaving their bags where they stood and walking away with only my own belongings. As I exited the terminal, a strange sense of liberation washed over me. For the first time in my life, I had chosen not to chase after my parents' approval. They had left me behind, but in doing so, they had inadvertently set me free. I had no idea what I was going to do next, stranded in San Francisco with a round trip ticket I no longer intended to use. But one thing was certain. The next time my parents saw me, everything would be different. I would make sure of it. Little did I know that fate had a twist in store that would exceed even my wildest imagination. In exactly 1 month, I would indeed see my parents again, not as their disappointing daughter, but as someone they would be forced to answer to. Someone with the power to change everything. I stood in the busy San Francisco International Airport terminal watching the last passengers disappear down the jetway. The gate agent gave me a sympathetic look as she closed the door. At that moment, reality hit me hard. I was alone, 3,000 miles from home, with only my carry-on and the burning sting of betrayal. My first instinct was to call my brother, Marcus. He'd always been the golden child, but we'd maintained a decent relationship despite our parents' obvious favoritism. I found a quiet corner near a coffee shop and dialed his number. "Emily? Aren't you supposed to be on a plane right now?" Marcus answered, sounding distracted. "That was the plan," I said, trying to keep my voice from cracking, until Mom and Dad boarded without me. There was a pause on the line. "What do you mean, without you? Did you miss the flight?" I explained what had happened, how they'd sent me to the gate with their bags while they handled some urgent business, only to board the plane without a word to me. "There must be some misunderstanding," Marcus said, though I could hear the doubt in his voice. "Maybe they thought you were already on board." The gate agent confirmed they boarded 20 minutes before the final call. They didn't even try to contact me, Marcus. They just left me. My brother sighed heavily. "Look, I'd like to say I'm surprised, but we both know how they are. What are you going to do now?" It was a good question. I had a return ticket from Singapore to Boston in 2 weeks, but no way to get to Singapore. I could buy a new ticket and chase after them, but the thought made my stomach turn. Why should I spend thousands of dollars to join people who couldn't even be bothered to make sure I was on the plane? "I'm not following them to Singapore," I said finally, surprising myself with my resolve. "I'm done chasing their approval." "Okay," Marcus said slowly. "So you're coming back to Boston?" I looked around the bustling terminal, watching travelers rush to their destinations, and suddenly the idea of returning to my routine felt suffocating. "No. I think I'm going to stay in San Francisco for a few days. Clear my head." "Are you sure that's a good idea? You're upset. And decisions made in anger?" "I'm not angry," I interrupted, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. "I'm just done. I need some time to figure out what's next." After promising Marcus I'd keep him updated, I ended the call and booked a room at a hotel near Union Square. It wasn't the luxury accommodation my parents had arranged in Singapore, but it was clean, comfortable, and, most importantly, mine. That night, as I lay in the unfamiliar hotel bed, my phone lit up with a text from my mother. "Emily, where are you? We're at the hotel in Singapore. Call immediately." No apology, no explanation, just a demand for information, as if I were the one who had done something wrong. I turned off my phone without responding and fell into a fitful sleep. The next morning, I woke to several missed calls and increasingly irritated messages from both parents. Their bags had apparently been removed from the flight for security reasons since they'd been checked in but not boarded. My father was particularly upset about his missing laptop and important documents. Sent a single text, "I'm safe, enjoy your trip." Then I turned my phone to silent, ordered room service, and tried to figure out what to do with my unexpected time in San Francisco. After breakfast, I decided to explore the city. It had been years since my last visit, and wandering the hilly streets helped clear my head. I found myself at Fisherman's Wharf, watching tourists and locals go about their day, when my phone buzzed with an unknown local number. "Hello?" I answered cautiously. "Is this Emily Richardson?" a woman's crisp voice asked. "Yes, it is. Who's calling?" "My name is Valerie Nichols, executive assistant to Jackson Ward at Horizon Ventures. I understand you're currently in San Francisco?" I froze mid-step. Horizon Ventures was one of the most prestigious venture capital firms on the West Coast, and Jackson Ward was something of a legend in the business world, a self-made billionaire known for spotting promising startups before anyone else. I am, I confirmed, wondering how she knew that. May I ask what this is regarding? Mr. Ward, would like to meet with you this afternoon if you're available. 3 o'clock at our offices in the financial district. My mind raced. How did Jackson Ward even know I existed, let alone that I was in San Francisco? It had to be a mistake. I think there might be some confusion, I began. I don't have any appointment with Horizon Ventures. There's no confusion, Ms. Richardson. Mr. Ward specifically requested this meeting after learning you were in the city. He's familiar with your work at East Coast Artisan Imports and has been following your company's growth with interest. Nearly dropped my phone. My little import business, as my parents dismissively called it, had caught the attention of Jackson Ward. It seemed impossible. I'll be there, I heard myself say before I could overthink it. After getting the details, I ended the call and immediately headed back to my hotel. If I was meeting one of the most influential investors in the country, I needed to prepare. I spent the next few hours researching Horizon Ventures' recent investments and polishing a mental pitch of my business model, just in case. At 2:45 p.m., I arrived at a sleek high-rise in the financial district. The security guard directed me to the 38th floor, where I was greeted by a striking woman in her 50s with salt and pepper hair cut in a precise bob. Ms. Richardson, I'm Valerie Nichols. We spoke earlier, she said, extending her hand. Mr. Ward is eager to meet you. She led me through a modern office space with glass walls and stunning views of the bay. Staff members worked quietly at minimalist workstations, occasionally glancing up as we passed. I felt distinctly out of place in my casual travel clothes, but it was too late to worry about that now. Valerie stopped at a corner office and knocked once before opening the door. Mr. Ward, Emily Richardson is here. The man who rose from behind. The desk wasn't what I expected. Jackson Ward was younger than his reputation suggested, maybe mid-40s, with dark hair graying at the temples and intense green eyes that seemed to evaluate everything they saw. He wore no tie with his expensive shirt, and his sleeves were rolled up as if he'd been working hard. Emily, thank you for coming on such short notice, he said, his voice carrying a slight southern accent. He gestured to a seating area by the window. Please, have a seat. Would you like something to drink? Coffee? Water? Water would be great. Thank you, I said, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. Once Valerie had brought our drinks and left, closing the door behind her, Jackson leaned forward, those intense eyes focused entirely on me. I imagine you're wondering why I asked you here, he began. The thought did cross my mind, I admitted. I'm not exactly on Horizon Ventures' usual radar. He smiled slightly. Don't sell yourself short, Emily. Your company has shown impressive growth in a challenging market. A 134% revenue increase in the last fiscal year, if my information is correct. I blinked in surprise. That figure wasn't public knowledge. Your information is very good. I make it my business to know things before others do, he said simply. It's how I've built my career. But that's not why I asked you here today. He paused, taking a sip of his water. I received an interesting call this morning from Timothy Chen. The name was familiar. From Chen Global Imports? Jackson nodded. The very same. He mentioned he'd been trying to reach your parents regarding a potential partnership with their law firm, but they hadn't arrived for their scheduled meeting in Singapore. He was concerned enough to reach out to mutual contacts. I felt a twinge of vindication knowing my parents had missed an important meeting, followed immediately by guilt for feeling that way. I'm not involved with my parents' business, I said carefully. So I gathered. But Tim also mentioned something else that caught my attention. A smaller import company that had been negotiating with his group for exclusive rights to certain artisanal products. A company called East Coast Artisan Imports. my company. I'd been in talks with Chen Global for months, but hadn't mentioned it to my parents. They would have only dismissed it as inconsequential. Mr. Chen speaks very highly of you, Jackson continued. He said you understand the market in a way most established importers don't, that you have an eye for products that bridge cultural gaps while maintaining authenticity. I felt my cheeks warm at the unexpected praise. Mr. Chen is generous with his compliments. Tim Chen doesn't give praise lightly, Jackson countered. And neither do I. He set down his glass and leaned forward. Which brings me to my proposition. My heart began to race. Was Horizon Ventures actually interested in investing in my company? I've recently acquired majority shares in a company called Global Nexus, Jackson explained. It's a multinational corporation with divisions in law, finance, and international trade. One of its subsidiaries is Richardson & Palmer International Law. I froze. Richardson & Palmer was my parents' firm. Your parents don't know about the acquisition yet, Jackson continued, watching my reaction closely. The paperwork was finalized yesterday, and the public announcement is scheduled for next month. Only the board and major stakeholders are aware. My mind was spinning. I don't understand. What does this have to do with me? Global Nexus needs someone to oversee its import division, someone who understands both international trade and the high legal complications that come with it, someone innovative, with fresh perspectives and proven growth strategies. His eyes held mine steadily. I think that someone could be you, Emily. I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. You want me to work for Global Nexus? I want you to run the entire import division, he clarified, with full authority to restructure as you see fit. Your company would be folded into Global Nexus, but you'd retain creative control and receive substantial equity in the parent corporation. The room seemed to tilt slightly. This wasn't just a job offer, it was a life-changing opportunity. And it would effectively make me my parents' boss, since their law firm would now answer to Global Nexus executives, including me. Why me? I asked, finding my voice. There must be dozens of more qualified candidates. Jackson leaned back, studying me. Do you know what sets successful entrepreneurs apart from failed ones, Emily? I shook my head. It's not education or connections, or even initial funding, though those things help. It's the ability to see value where others don't. To identify potential that others overlook. He smiled slightly. Your parents are excellent lawyers, but they lack that vision. You have it in abundance. He pulled a folder from the side table and handed it to me. This contains the formal offer, including compensation details and an overview of what the position entails. Take some time to review it. We can meet again tomorrow if you have questions. I accepted the folder, still struggling to process everything. This is unexpected. The best opportunities usually are, Jackson said, rising to indicate our meeting was concluding. One more thing, Emily. The board meeting to introduce the new management structure is scheduled for 3 weeks from now, in Singapore. The significance wasn't lost on me. In 3 weeks, I could potentially walk into a boardroom in Singapore, the very city my parents had abandoned me trying to reach, as their superior. I'll consider your offer carefully, Mr. Ward, I said, standing and extending my hand. Thank you for the opportunity. Jackson, please, he said, shaking my hand firmly. And Emily? Sometimes being left behind is the best thing that can happen to a person. It forces you to find your own path. As I left the Horizon Ventures offices, the weight of the folder in my hand felt like both an anchor and a lifeline. Part of me wondered if this was all an elaborate dream, or worse, some kind of cruel joke. But the details in the contract were too specific, the numbers too precise. This was real. I had been offered a position that would not only catapult my career but also fundamentally alter my relationship with my parents. The question was, did I want that power? Back at my hotel, I ordered room service and spread the contract documents across the bed. The compensation package was beyond generous. A base salary 3 times what I currently paid myself, plus stock options, performance bonuses, and relocation assistance. But it wasn't the money that made my hands tremble as I read through the position details. It was the authority. As division president, I would oversee operations across 3 continents, manage a team of over 50 employees, and report directly to the CEO, Jackson himself. My phone buzzed with another text from my mother. "Your father is furious about his missing documents. This childish behavior needs to stop immediately." I stared at the message, then at the contract, and felt a strange calm descend over me. For the first time in my life, I held real leverage in my relationship with my parents. The question was no longer whether I was good enough for them, but whether they were good enough for the company I might soon help lead. I picked up my phone and called the one person I trusted to give me objective advice. "Marcus, it's me. You're not going to believe what just happened." As I recounted my meeting with Jackson Ward, I could hear the shock in my brother's voice. When I finished, there was a long silence on the line. "So, let me get this straight," he finally said. "In the span of 24 hours, you went from being abandoned at an airport to being offered a job that would essentially make you mom and dad's boss?" "That about sums it up," I confirmed. "What do you think I should do?" Marcus laughed softly. "What do you want to do, Em?" I thought about all the times my parents had dismissed my ambitions, all the condescending comments about my little business, all the years of trying to earn their respect. And I thought about Jackson Ward, who had seen value in me that my own parents had missed. "I think," I said slowly, "that it's time for me to stop trying to win their approval and start building the life I want. If that means making some uncomfortable changes in our family dynamic, so be it." "That's my little sister," Marcus said, and I could hear the pride in his voice. "For what it's worth, I think you should take the job. Not to get back at mom and dad, but because you've earned it." After we hung up, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring out at the San Francisco skyline as night fell over the city. 24 hours ago, I felt abandoned and lost. Now, I was staring at an opportunity that could redefine my future. I picked up my phone one last time that night and composed a text to my parents. "I won't be joining you in Singapore as planned. Something unexpected has come up. See you in a few weeks." Then I reached for the contract and began reading it again, this time with a pen in hand to make notes. If I was going to step into this new role, I needed to be prepared. Because in exactly 1 month I would be facing my parents across a boardroom table, not as their forgotten daughter, but as someone they would need to answer to. And I wanted to be ready. The morning after my meeting with Jackson Ward, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The contract lay on the nightstand where I'd left it, already signed and dated. I'd made my decision shortly after speaking with Marcus, realizing this wasn't just an opportunity for career advancement. It was a chance to redefine myself outside of my parents' shadow. I called Valerie Nichols and arranged to drop off the signed paperwork that afternoon. She sounded pleased but not surprised, as if Jackson had known all along what my answer would be. "Mr. Ward would like to meet with you again to discuss the transition timeline," she informed me. "He's available at 4 p.m. today if that works for you." 4 hours later, I found myself back in Jackson's corner office, this time dressed in business attire I'd purchased that morning. No more casual travel clothes. If I was going to step into this role, I needed to look the part. "Emily," Jackson greeted me with a firm handshake. "I'm delighted you've accepted our offer." "Thank you for the opportunity," I replied, settling into the chair across from his desk. "I'm eager to get started." "That's exactly what I wanted to hear." He smiled, sliding a sleek tablet toward me. "Here's the transition plan I've outlined. We have 3 weeks before the board meeting in Singapore, which doesn't give us much time." I scrolled through the detailed timeline he'd prepared. The next 3 weeks would be intense. Crash courses in global Nexus operations, meetings with key team members, strategy sessions to outline my vision for the import division, and intensive preparation for the board presentation. This is comprehensive, I said, feeling a flutter of anxiety as I absorbed the sheer volume of information. I'd need to master. You weren't kidding about hitting the ground running. Success favors the prepared, Emily. Jackson leaned forward, his expression serious. I'm investing in you because I believe you have what it takes, but this won't be easy. The board members will scrutinize your every word, looking for any reason to doubt my decision. And your parents? He trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. My parents would be more than just skeptical. They'd be blindsided and likely furious. I understand, I assured him, straightening my shoulders. I'm ready for the challenge. Good. We start tomorrow, 8 a.m. sharp. He stood, effectively ending our meeting. One last thing. I've arranged for you to stay at the Stanford Court Hotel for the next month. Your room is already prepared and a company car will be at your disposal. The transition team will meet you there tomorrow morning. As I left the Horizon Ventures building, a sleek black SUV was waiting curbside. The driver, a professionally dressed woman named Diane, helped with my single bag and drove me to my new temporary home. The hotel was elegant and centrally located, a far cry from the budget-friendly place I'd chosen for myself. Ms. Nichols said to give you this, Diane said as we arrived, handing me an envelope. Inside was a company credit card in my name and a note, for expenses during your transition. Welcome to the team. J.W. That night, as I settled into my luxury suite, I received another text from my mother. Emily, this silent treatment is unacceptable. Your father has had to reschedule several important meetings because of the documents you kept. Call us immediately. I considered ignoring it, as I had the others, but something about my new position gave me the confidence to respond. I didn't keep anything. You and Dad abandoned me at the airport without a word. I'll see you both in a few weeks. Until then, I suggest you focus on your business in Singapore rather than blaming me for your poor planning. I turned off notifications before she could reply and focused on preparing for the coming day. Whatever response she sent would have to wait. I had more important things to concentrate on. The next 3 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. I was assigned a transition team of 5 experts: legal, finance, operations, international trade, and corporate strategy, each tasked with bringing me up to speed on their respective areas. Days began at 7 a.m. with briefings and ended well past midnight as I studied company reports and market analyses. Jackson had arranged for my small import company to be temporarily managed by a trusted colleague, allowing me to focus entirely on the global Nexus transition. It was both exhilarating and exhausting, pushing me far beyond what I thought I was capable of handling. By the end of the first week, I'd met with 15 department heads, reviewed countless financial statements, and begun drafting my vision for restructuring the import division. The more I learned about Global Nexus, the more confident I became that I could actually succeed in this role. You're a quick study, remarked Caroline Hayes, the corporate strategist assigned to my team, after a particularly grueling session on international tariff regulations. Most executives take months to grasp what you've absorbed in days. I've always been good at seeing patterns, I explained, rubbing my tired eyes. And I've dealt with most of these regulations on a smaller scale with my own company. That hands-on experience is invaluable, she agreed. It gives you credibility that most corporate climbers lack. During the second week, I had my first video conference with the Singapore office, carefully scheduled when my parents would be in meetings elsewhere. The local management team seemed impressed with my knowledge and ideas, though I could sense their reservation about reporting to someone so young. Ms. Richardson, said David Wang, the Asia-Pacific Regional Director, your proposed restructuring of the supply chain is ambitious. Do you believe it's achievable within the first quarter? With the right team and proper resources, absolutely, I responded confidently. I've implemented similar changes in my own company with far fewer resources and saw results within 6 weeks. By the end of the call, I'd won over most of the senior staff with my detailed knowledge and practical experience. Only a few remained skeptical, but I knew that would change once they saw results. Throughout this period, my parents continued to send increasingly frustrated messages. They'd apparently learned from Marcus that I was still in San Francisco, but couldn't understand why I wasn't joining them in Singapore as planned. I provided minimal responses, never mentioning my new position or the upcoming board meeting. Marcus called regularly, eager for updates on my crash course in corporate leadership. "How's the corporate takeover going?" he joked during one late-night call. "It's intense," I admitted, sprawled across my hotel bed surrounded by financial reports. "But honestly, Marcus, I've never felt more alive. For the first time, I'm being valued for my actual abilities, not measured against someone else's expectations." "Mom called me again today," he said, his tone growing serious. "She's convinced you're having some kind of breakdown. Dad is threatening to cut off your allowance if you don't start answering their calls properly." I laughed at that. I haven't received an allowance since college, and even then I barely touched it. Shows how little they know about my finances. "What are you going to tell them when you see them?" Marcus asked. It was a question I'd been pondering myself. How exactly does one tell Gregory and Susan Richardson that their overlooked daughter was now effectively their superior? "The truth," I said simply, "that their decision to leave me behind set off a chain of events that led to this opportunity. That sometimes being forgotten is the best thing that can happen to a person." As the third week began, preparations for the Singapore trip intensified. Jackson arranged for a complete professional wardrobe for me. Tailored suits, designer dresses, accessories that conveyed authority and confidence. "Image matters in corporate leadership," explained Valerie as we reviewed the selection. "Especially for young women. These clothes are armor as much as they are fashion." She was right. When I tried on the first perfectly tailored blazer and looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. Gone was the uncertain entrepreneur trying to prove her worth. In her place stood a poised executive ready to lead. The transformation wasn't just external. With each day of intensive training, my confidence grew. I began to see the bigger picture of global trade beyond my small import business, identifying inefficiencies in the current system and developing innovative solutions that impressed even Jackson. "You've exceeded my expectations," he told me during our final strategy session before Singapore. And trust me, those were already high. 2 days before our departure, I received an urgent call from Marcus. "I don't know what you're planning, but Mom and Dad are on the warpath," he warned. "They're cutting their Singapore trip short and flying back tomorrow. Dad's talking about hiring a private investigator to figure out what's going on with you." I smiled at the irony. Let them come. By the time they reach San Francisco, I'll be on my way to Singapore. "Are you sure about this?" Marcus asked, concern evident in his voice. "Once you do this, there's no going back. Your relationship with them will never be the same." "Our relationship was never what I wanted it to be anyway," I pointed out. "Maybe this is the shock they need to finally see me as my own person, not just their disappointing daughter." The night before my departure, I sat on the balcony of my hotel suite, watching the lights of San Francisco twinkle below. In just 3 weeks, my entire life had transformed. I'd gone from feeling abandoned and worthless to standing on the precipice of a career most people could only dream about. My phone buzzed with a text from Jackson. "Car will pick you up at 7 a.m. Private jet departs at 9. Get some rest. You've earned it. A private jet." It was surreal how quickly my circumstances had changed. 3 weeks ago, I'd been devastated about missing a commercial flight. Now I was traveling by private aircraft to meet the board of a multinational corporation as a division president. I slept surprisingly well that night, waking refreshed and ready for whatever lay ahead. The company car arrived precisely at 7, and by 8:30 I was boarding a sleek Gulfstream G650 emblazoned with the Global Nexus logo. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Richardson," the flight attendant greeted me. "Mr. Ward and the other executives are already seated." Inside the luxurious cabin, Jackson sat with 3 other people I recognized as senior Global Nexus executives: the CFO, COO, and Chief Legal Officer. All rose to greet me with respect due to a peer, not a subordinate. "Emily," Jackson said warmly, "I believe you've met everyone over video conference, but allow me to introduce you properly. This is Catherine Montrose, our CFO, James Peterson, COO, and Alexander Kim, our legal chief." Each executive shook my hand firmly, offering congratulations on my new position. There was no condescension, no subtle questioning of my qualifications, just professional courtesy and genuine welcome. "We've been reviewing your proposal for restructuring the import division," Catherine said as we settled into the plush leather seats. "Your cost-saving projections are impressive, especially the integrated supply chain model," James added. "We should consider implementing similar efficiencies across other divisions." As the jet took off, we delved into a detailed discussion of my vision for the import division. The flight to Singapore would take nearly 17 hours, but with in-flight sleeping accommodations and the stimulating company, I knew the time would pass quickly. Midway through the flight, during a break in our strategy discussions, Jackson joined me in the private lounge area of the aircraft. "How are you feeling?" he asked, pouring us each a glass of sparkling water. "Prepared," I said honestly. 3 weeks ago, I would have been terrified, but now, I'm ready. He nodded approvingly. "You've done remarkable work in a short time, but I want to address the elephant in the room, your parents." I tensed slightly. Though Jackson knew my parents would be at the board meeting, we hadn't discussed the personal dimension of our professional relationship. "The board meeting is scheduled for 10 a.m. the day after tomorrow," he continued. "Your parents are expected to attend as representatives of their law firm. They don't yet know about the acquisition or your new position." "How do you think they'll react?" I asked, though I already had a good idea. Jackson's expression was measured. "Based on what you've told me about them, and my own limited interactions, I expect initial shock followed by resistance. They may question your qualifications publicly, or worse, try to undermine your authority." "And how should I handle that?" I wondered aloud. "With the grace and professionalism you've demonstrated these past 3 weeks," he said simply. "Remember, Emily, in that boardroom you won't be their daughter. You'll be the president of Global Import Operations, a position you've earned through your own merit." He leaned forward slightly. "That said, I'm not naive about family dynamics. If at any point you feel the situation is becoming untenable, signal me, and I'll intervene." I appreciated his concern but shook my head. "Thank you, but that won't be necessary. I've spent my entire life seeking their approval. It's time they sought mine." Jackson smiled, raising his glass in a toast. "To new beginnings." "And unexpected journeys," I added, clinking my glass against his. As our flight continued over the Pacific, I reviewed my presentation one last time. Everything was in order: financial projections, organizational charts, strategic initiatives, all meticulously prepared and backed by solid research. Yet beneath my professional preparation lurked personal questions I couldn't answer. Would my parents be proud of my achievement, however belatedly? Would they finally recognize my capabilities? Or would they see this as some sort of betrayal, their daughter conspiring behind their backs to gain power over them? I dozed off eventually, dreaming of boardrooms and family dinners strangely intertwined. When I woke as we began our descent into Singapore, the anxiety had dissipated, replaced by a calm determination. Whatever happened in that boardroom, one thing was certain: I was no longer the daughter left behind at the airport, scrambling for approval. I was Emily Richardson, Division President of Global Nexus, and I was about to show my parents exactly what they'd been too blind to see. The plane touched down smoothly at Singapore Changi Airport, where a fleet of black luxury cars awaited our arrival. As we disembarked, Jackson fell into step beside me. "Your parents are staying at the Marina Bay Sands," he informed me quietly. "We've arranged accommodations for you at the Fullerton, where the board meeting will be held. Different enough that you won't run into them before the meeting, but close enough to be convenient." I nodded gratefully. The last thing I wanted was a premature confrontation in a hotel lobby. The drive from the airport to the Fullerton Hotel offered stunning views of Singapore's ultra-modern skyline. Under different circumstances, I might have been awestruck by the architectural marvels and lush greenery that had earned the city its Garden City nickname. But my mind was focused on the task ahead. We arrived at the hotel, an imposing colonial building that had once served as Singapore's general post office. A team of staff members greeted us at the entrance, whisking away our luggage and escorting us to a private check-in area reserved for VIP guests. "Ms. Richardson, welcome to the Fullerton," the manager greeted me personally. "Your presidential suite is prepared, and your schedule for tomorrow has been arranged as requested." Once in my suite, a stunning space with panoramic views of Marina Bay, I found a handwritten note from Jackson. "Rest well. Tomorrow we will prepare. The day after, we make history." I stepped out onto the balcony, gazing across the bay to where I could just make out the distinctive triple towers of the Marina Bay Sands. Somewhere in that building, my parents were going about their business, completely unaware that their carefully constructed world was about to change forever. The thought brought not satisfaction or revenge, but a strange sense of peace. For the first time in my life, I was writing my own story instead of trying to fit into theirs. As night fell over Singapore, I ordered room service and reviewed my notes one final time. Tomorrow would be dedicated to final preparations and a tour of the local offices. The day after would bring the board meeting, and the reckoning I'd been both dreading and anticipating. Just before midnight, my phone buzzed with a text from my father. "Emily, your mother and I are extremely disappointed in your behavior. We've spoken with Dr. Levinson about scheduling an evaluation when we all return to Boston. This erratic conduct is concerning." Dr. Levinson was the family therapist they'd forced me to see during my rebellious college years when I'd first announced my plan to start my own business instead of pursuing law. I typed a brief reply. "I'm in Singapore. See you at 10 a.m. Day after tomorrow, Fullerton Hotel, Diamond Ballroom. All will be explained then." Before he could respond, I turned off my phone. Whatever they made of that cryptic message would have to sustain them until our meeting. I needed rest and clarity for what lay ahead. As I drifted off to sleep in the luxurious suite, I realized something surprising. I was no longer afraid of facing my parents. For the first time in my life, I was approaching them not from a position of weakness or need, but from one of strength and independence. The abandoned daughter was returning, not as a supplicant seeking approval, but as a leader ready to chart her own course, and nothing would ever be the same again. The morning of the board meeting dawned bright and clear over Singapore. I woke before my alarm, a mixture of anticipation and nervous energy making further sleep impossible. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my suite, I watched the sunrise paint the city skyline in hues of gold and amber, a new day that would forever alter the course of my life. My phone buzzed with a text from Jackson. "Car arriving in 90 minutes. Breakfast in my suite at 30? Last-minute prep." I responded with a quick affirmative and began my carefully planned morning routine. The wardrobe team had selected a tailored charcoal suit with subtle pinstripes for today. Professional, powerful, but not ostentatious. I applied my makeup with precision, aiming for polished confidence rather than intimidation. This wasn't about overpowering my parents. It was about commanding the respect I'd earned. At precisely 7:30 a.m., I knocked on Jackson's suite door. He greeted me looking impeccable in a navy suit, his expression calm but eyes alert. "Sleep well?" he asked, gesturing me toward a dining table already set with breakfast and surrounded by tablets displaying our presentation materials. "Well enough," I replied, accepting the coffee he offered. "Any last-minute changes I should know about?" "Just one. The board chair wants you to present first, before the legal division updates. Apparently, the quarterly numbers for imports are causing some concern, and they want to hear your strategy immediately." I nodded, feeling a flutter of nerves. This meant I'd be presenting before my parents had any idea what was happening. Their first indication that something had changed would be seeing me walk to the front of the boardroom. "Do my parents know I'm attending the meeting?" I asked, selecting a croissant from the breakfast spread. Jackson shook his head. "Your cryptic text message is all they have to go on. Security has been instructed to direct them to the boardroom when they arrive, same as any other attendee." The element of surprise remains intact. We spent the next hour reviewing key points, anticipating potential questions, and refining our responses. Jackson had been coaching me on boardroom dynamics, who the influential voices were, which board members might be skeptical of such a young division president, who would likely be supportive. "Remember," he said as we gathered our materials, "you've earned this position through merit, not connection or inheritance. That gives you a foundation they can't undermine." At 9:30 a.m., we headed down to the Diamond Ballroom, where the hotel staff had transformed the space into an impressive boardroom. A massive oval table dominated the center, surrounded by leather chairs embossed with the Global Nexus logo. Digital displays hung on the walls, currently showing the company's global reach across a world map. "The board members will begin arriving soon," Jackson informed me. "I suggest we use this time for you to familiarize yourself with the presentation setup." I nodded, approaching the podium at the head of the table. A technician showed me how to advance my slides and operate the integrated microphone system. Everything was state-of-the-art, designed to impress and facilitate seamless communication. By 9:45, board members began filtering in, distinguished, men and women from various countries, all exuding the quiet confidence that comes with significant power and responsibility. Jackson made introductions, and I was pleased to find that many had already read my proposal and seemed genuinely interested in my vision for the import division. At 9:55, Valerie appeared at my side. "Your parents have just arrived in the lobby," she murmured. "They should be here momentarily." My heart rate accelerated, but my expression remained composed. Years of hiding my reactions from my parents' criticism had prepared me well for this moment. At exactly 10 a.m., the board chair called the meeting to order. I was seated near the front of the room, partially obscured from the entrance by a group of executives. From my position, I could see the door, but remained relatively inconspicuous. Then I heard them. My father's authoritative voice thanking the security guard who had escorted them, my mother's distinctive click of heels on marble. They entered the boardroom with the confidence of people accustomed to commanding attention. My father in his trademark tailored suit, my mother elegant in a designer dress and pearls. They paused momentarily, scanning the room for their assigned seats, seemingly oblivious to my presence. The board chair, a distinguished woman named Eleanor Harding, welcomed them politely but briefly before addressing the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attendance today. Before we begin with standard updates, I'd like to introduce a significant addition to our executive leadership team. As you know, Global Nexus has been seeking innovative strategies to revitalize our import division, and I'm pleased to announce we've found the perfect person to lead this initiative." My parents settled into their seats, looking mildly interested, but hardly captivated. They'd sat through countless corporate introductions over their careers. "Please join me in welcoming Emily Richardson, our new president of Global Import Operations." I rose from my seat and walked confidently to the podium, watching as my parents' expressions transformed from polite attention to absolute shock. My father's mouth actually dropped open, while my mother gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles whitening. "Thank you, Madam Chair," I began, my voice steady and professional. It's an honor to join the Global Nexus team and to present my vision for revolutionizing our import division. As I launched into my presentation, displaying slides of market analyses and growth projections, I could feel my parents' eyes boring into me. My father's expression had hardened into something between fury and disbelief, while my mother seemed to be struggling to maintain her composed facade. For the next 20 minutes, I outlined my comprehensive strategy: supply chain optimizations, exclusive partnership agreements, technological integrations, and targeted expansion into emerging markets. The board members listened attentively, occasionally nodding or making notes. Several asked insightful questions which I answered confidently, drawing on both my theoretical training from the past weeks and my practical experience as a business owner. Throughout it all, my parents remained silent, though I could almost see the gears turning behind my father's calculating gaze. He was a skilled attorney, accustomed to controlling situations through careful analysis and precise responses. But for perhaps the first time in his professional life, he had been completely blindsided. As I concluded my presentation, the board chair opened the floor for questions. A distinguished board member from London inquired about implementation timelines. Another from Tokyo asked about regulatory challenges in Southeast Asian markets. I fielded each question with assurance, occasionally deferring to Jackson for confirmation. On corporate policy details, then my father raised his hand. Gregory Richardson, Richardson & Palmer International Law. He introduced himself unnecessarily. Ms. Richardson, your presentation is certainly ambitious. However, I notice a lack of attention to the legal complexities involved in your proposed expansion into restricted markets. As someone who has specialized in international trade law for over 30 years, I can assure you these obstacles are not trivial. His tone was pure condescension, the same tone he'd used countless times at our dinner table when explaining why my ideas wouldn't work. I smiled politely. An excellent question, Mr. Richardson. If you'll refer to Appendix C in your digital packets, you'll find a comprehensive analysis of the regulatory challenges in each targeted market, along with our proposed mitigation strategies. This analysis was conducted in partnership with our legal team and includes contingency plans for various regulatory scenarios. I paused, meeting his gaze directly. Additionally, we've already secured preliminary approvals in 3 of the 5 markets discussed as noted on page 17 of the main presentation. My father's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. He hadn't expected such thorough preparation. Before he could formulate another challenge, my mother spoke up. Susan Richardson, also of Richardson & Palmer, she said smoothly. I'm curious about your background, Ms. Richardson. Your approach seems rather unconventional for someone in this position. Could you elaborate on the experience that qualifies you to lead such a critical division? The question was a barely veiled attack, designed to expose what she presumed was my lack of qualifications. In our family dynamic, she had always been the one to question my choices while my father dismissed them. Of course, I replied calmly. I founded and operated East Coast Artisan Imports, which achieved 134% revenue growth in the past fiscal year through innovative sourcing strategies and direct-to-consumer distribution models. Prior to that, I worked in international logistics with a focus on regulatory compliance. My hands-on experience in building supply chains from the ground up offers a perspective that complements Global Nexus's established infrastructure. I paused before adding, Mr. Ward and the executive team conducted an extensive review of my qualifications before offering me this position. I believe the board has received copies of that assessment in your pre-meeting materials. Eleanor Harding nodded in confirmation. Indeed, the executive committee unanimously endorsed Ms. Richardson's appointment after a thorough vetting process. My mother's expression faltered slightly, her practiced smile becoming fixed. I recognized the look. It was the same one she wore when clients proved more knowledgeable than she'd anticipated. The board meeting continued with updates from other divisions. My parents remained unusually quiet throughout. exchanging occasional glances that spoke volumes about their confusion and dismay. When the meeting adjourned for a 30-minute break before afternoon sessions, I knew the real confrontation was about to begin. As board members filed out for refreshments, my parents remained seated, clearly waiting for the room to empty. Jackson caught my eye from across the table and raised an eyebrow in silent question. I gave a subtle nod, indicating I was prepared to handle this alone. Once the last board member had left, my father wasted no time. "What the hell is going on, Emily?" he demanded, his professional veneer slipping. "Is this some kind of elaborate stunt to embarrass us?" I gathered my presentation materials calmly. "It's not a stunt, Dad. It's my new position, as was explained. In the meeting, I've been appointed to lead the import division of Global Nexus." "This is absurd," my mother interjected, her voice tight with contained anger. "You can't possibly be qualified for this role. What did you do? Charm Jackson Ward into giving you a position well beyond your capabilities?" The insinuation stung, but I refused to show it. "Mr. Ward offered me this position based on my track record of innovation and growth in international imports. Something you both might have noticed if you'd ever taken my business seriously." My father stood, pacing the length of the table. "So, this is about revenge? Because we didn't coddle you enough? Because we pushed you to achieve more than running a small-time import shop out of a warehouse?" "No, Dad. This is about opportunity. One that came to me because I was exactly where I needed to be, doing exactly what I was meant to do." I met his gaze steadily. "Even if that place was an airport terminal where you'd abandoned me without a second thought." My mother flinched slightly at that. "We did not abandon you. There was clearly a misunderstanding." "There was no misunderstanding," I interrupted, something I rarely dared to do with her. "You and Dad boarded that plane knowing. I wasn't with you. You made a choice, and that choice had consequences, just not the ones you expected." My father's expression darkened. "So you're our boss now? Is that what this little power play is about? Getting back at us by forcing us to report to our own daughter?" I shook my head, disappointed but not surprised by his interpretation. "This isn't about power, Dad. It's about respect. Something I've never received from either of you. And technically, as president of Global Import Operations, I would be working with Richardson and Palmer on trade-related legal matters, not directly supervising your firm. Though as a majority shareholder in Global Nexus, the parent company now owns controlling interest in your firm." That last detail landed like a bombshell. My father stopped pacing, his face paling slightly. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Global Nexus acquired majority shares in your firm 3 weeks ago," I explained. "The paperwork was finalized the day after you left me at the airport. An interesting coincidence, wouldn't?" "You say?" My mother sank back into her chair. "This is impossible. We would have been notified of any acquisition attempt." "The board was notified," I confirmed, "which means either they didn't inform you or you weren't paying attention to the communications. Given how dismissive you both are of details you deem unimportant, I'm guessing it was the latter." My father's attorney instincts kicked in. "This acquisition can't possibly be legal. There are protections in place." "All legal procedures were followed meticulously," I assured him. "The documentation is available for your review, though I'm sure your firm's legal team has already vetted everything. After all, that's what you pay them for, isn't it? To handle the details you don't have time for?" The irony wasn't lost on them. How many times had they used that exact justification for missing my school events, forgetting my birthdays, or dismissing my accomplishments? My mother's shock was giving way to calculation. "Emily, surely we can discuss this reasonably. We're family, after all. Whatever grievances you think you have—" "This isn't about grievances," I cut in. "This is business. Global Nexus made a strategic acquisition that happens to include your firm. My appointment to this position is entirely separate from that transaction." I gathered my tablet and notes. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to prepare for the afternoon session. As I turned to leave, my father called after me. Emily, wait. You can't just drop this bomb and walk away. What exactly are you expecting to happen here? I paused at the door, considering his question. What am I expecting? Professional courtesy? Competent legal counsel for our import operations, and the basic respect you'd give any corporate executive. Nothing more, nothing less. And what about our family relationship? My mother asked, a hint of genuine emotion finally breaking through. Her polished exterior. That's entirely up to you, I replied honestly. I've spent my entire life trying to earn your approval, trying to be worthy of your attention. I'm done with that now. If you want a relationship with me, your daughter, not your superior, you'll have to make that effort yourselves for a change. With that, I walked out of the boardroom, leaving them to process the seismic shift that had just occurred in both our professional and personal dynamics. In the hallway, Jackson was waiting, a knowing look on his face. Family reunions can be complicated, he observed mildly. That might be the understatement of the century, I replied, feeling surprisingly light despite the intensity of the confrontation. But necessary. How do you think they'll respond? He asked as we walked toward the executive lounge where other board members were gathered. I considered the question carefully. They're strategic thinkers above all else. Once the shock wears off, they'll analyze the situation and determine their best course of action. I smiled slightly. And knowing my parents, that will involve finding a way to take credit for my success while adjusting to the new reality. Jackson nodded. Most people do eventually adapt to changed circumstances, especially when they have no choice. The question is whether they can see beyond their own perspective enough to recognize the opportunity this presents. Opportunity? I echoed. To finally know their daughter, he said simply. The real one, not the version they tried to create. As we entered the executive lounge, I was greeted warmly by board members eager to discuss my presentation further. For the first time in my life, I was being evaluated solely on my ideas and abilities, not on how I measured up to someone else's expectations. During the networking break, Naomi Chen, the board member representing Asian markets, approached me with genuine interest in my import strategies. Your analysis of the Vietnamese textile market was particularly insightful, she commented. Most executives overlook the rural artisan collectives, focusing only on the factory-scale operations. The artisan sector is where the most authentic products originate, I explained. By establishing direct relationships with these communities, we can offer truly unique items while ensuring ethical production standards. Naomi nodded approvingly. Precisely the kind of innovative thinking we've been lacking. I'd love to introduce you to some of my contacts in the region when you're ready to implement your strategy. As we exchanged contact information, I noticed my parents entering the lounge, their expressions carefully controlled as they surveyed the room. My father immediately gravitated toward the board chair, clearly intent on damage control. My mother, ever the strategic networker, approached a group of senior executives with practiced charm. Jackson appeared at my side. Your parents recover quickly, he observed. They've built their careers on adaptability, I replied, though I suspect they're just regrouping before the next confrontation. Which will come sooner rather than later, Jackson murmured, nodding. Toward my father, who was now making his way toward us, my mother close behind. I straightened my shoulders, preparing for round 2. This time, they approached with professional smiles firmly in place, the public face of Richardson and Palmer, that had closed countless deals and won numerous cases. Emily, Mr. Ward, my father greeted us with forced cordiality. Quite an impressive presentation earlier. You've certainly been busy these past few weeks. Thank you, Dad, I replied, matching his professional tone. Global Nexus has provided an incredible opportunity to implement strategies I've been developing for years. We're extremely proud, my mother added, her voice carrying just enough to be overheard by nearby board members. Though, of course, not surprised, Emily has always shown remarkable business acumen, a Richardson family trait. I nearly laughed at the audacity. After years of dismissing my business sense as inadequate, she was now claiming it as a family inheritance. Jackson caught my eye, his expression confirming he recognized the tactic for what it was. "How convenient that you've recognized that talent now," I responded pleasantly. "I don't recall the same enthusiasm when I started my import business." My father cleared his throat. "Perhaps we focus too much on traditional career paths. The legal profession has served our family well, for generations. Different paths can lead to success," I agreed, something I had to discover without much family support. Before either of them could respond, Eleanor Harding joined our group, her timing impeccable. "Emily, your parents must be incredibly proud. To have raised such an innovative thinker speaks well of their influence." The compliment was double-edged, placing my parents in a position where they could either agree and tacitly take credit for my success or disagree and appear unsupportive in front of the board chair. "We've always encouraged independent thinking," my mother replied smoothly, stepping into the trap with practiced grace. "Though I must admit, Emily has exceeded even our ambitious expectations." I maintained my professional smile, though internally I marveled at how quickly my mother had rewritten our family history. In her new narrative, my career choices weren't rebellious disappointments, but examples of the independent thinking they had nurtured. "How fortunate that Global Nexus recognized Emily's potential," Eleanor continued. "Jackson has been singing her praises since he discovered her work. The acquisition of Richardson and Palmer came at just the right moment to create this perfect synergy between our legal and import divisions." My father's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Indeed. Though we're still reviewing some of the acquisition details. Standard due diligence, of course." "Of course," Jackson agreed pleasantly. "Though I assure you, everything was handled with the utmost legal precision. We wouldn't want to begin our partnership with any misunderstandings." The subtle reference to their abandonment of me at the airport wasn't lost on my parents. My mother's smile flickered momentarily before she regained composure. "Speaking of partnerships," she pivoted smoothly, "Susan and I would love to host a dinner this evening to celebrate Emily's new position. Perhaps at the Raffles Hotel? I understand their restaurant has earned quite a reputation." The invitation caught me off guard. It was a classic Richardson maneuver: regain control of an uncomfortable situation by shifting it to terrain where they excelled. My parents were masterful at social functions, using elegant dinners to establish dominance and forge alliances. "That's a generous offer," I replied carefully. "But I already have dinner plans with the implementation team to discuss tomorrow's action items." "Surely they would understand postponing for a family celebration," my father pressed. "We could invite key board members as well, make it a welcome event for you." I recognized the strategy immediately. They wanted to position themselves as my proud sponsors, rewriting the narrative from abandonment to orchestrated success. A dinner where they played host would give the impression that my appointment had their blessing all along. "While I appreciate the gesture," I said firmly, "tonight's meeting is crucial for our timeline. Perhaps another evening before we leave." "Singapore?" My mother's expression cooled slightly. "Of course, your work should take priority. We understand dedication to one's career better than most." The subtle barb, implying I was choosing work over family, just as they had done countless times, wasn't lost on me. But unlike the many occasions when such comments had made me doubt myself, this time I felt only a calm certainty about my boundaries. "I'm glad you understand," I replied. "After all, you've always demonstrated that professional obligations come first." Eleanor, sensing the undercurrent of tension, tactfully steered the conversation toward broader company matters. As discussions continued about Global Nexus's strategic direction, I observed my parents carefully. They participated with their usual eloquence and insight, offering legal perspectives that were genuinely valuable. Yet beneath their professional contributions, I caught moments of genuine surprise when I spoke about market trends or regulatory challenges, as if they were seeing aspects of me they'd never noticed before. When the afternoon session reconvened, my parents took seats directly across from me, maintaining eye contact throughout the proceedings. As various executives presented their quarterly updates, I could feel them assessing me with new eyes. Not as their disappointing daughter, but as an unexpected variable in their carefully planned professional lives. The afternoon concluded with a formal vote on my proposed restructuring plan for the import division. When Eleanor called for those in favor, every hand around the table rose, including, after a moment's hesitation, those of my parents. The unanimous approval was entered into the record, officially launching my vision for Global Nexus's import operations. As the meeting adjourned, board members filed out with handshakes and congratulations. I gathered my materials, preparing to join Jackson for our scheduled debrief when my father approached alone. "Emily," he began, his voice lower and less certain than before. "Your mother and I would like to speak with you privately before you leave. Not about business. About what happened at the airport." I studied him carefully, searching for signs of the manipulation I'd grown accustomed to, but instead, I saw something rare in Gregory Richardson's expression: genuine discomfort. "I have 15 minutes before my next meeting," I said. "We can use the small conference room next door." He nodded, relief evident in his posture. "I'll get your mother." Minutes later, we sat around a small table in a room that felt simultaneously too large and too confining for the conversation we were about to have. My parents sat side by side, presenting a united front as always, while I faced them alone. Familiar dynamic suddenly cast in new light. "First," my father began, his lawyer's training evident in how he structured his opening, "we want to acknowledge that there was a serious lapse in communication at the San Francisco airport. For that, we owe you an apology." The words were right, but the delivery felt rehearsed. A settlement offer rather than genuine remorse. "A lapse in communication?" I echoed. "Is that how you see it?" my mother interjected, her tone conciliatory. "Emily, we truly believed you were already on board. When we realized you weren't, the doors had closed and there was nothing we could do." "Nothing except call me," I pointed out, "or text, or have the airline staff check if I was in the terminal, or wait for the next flight so we could travel together as planned." My father shifted uncomfortably. "We did try calling, but by then we were already taxiing. After which you enjoyed a 16-hour flight without apparent concern for my whereabouts," I continued. "And upon landing, your first communication wasn't to check if I was safe. It was to berate me for having your luggage." My mother's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly. "We were worried sick about you. We just expressed it poorly." "You were worried about your documents and your schedule," I corrected her. "Let's not rewrite history now. We've had enough of that for one day." My father leaned forward, abandoning the practiced posture. "Fine. You're right. We were focused on our meetings, on the clients we couldn't afford to disappoint. We made a terrible decision in the moment, and then we compounded it by not admitting our mistake." This admission, blunt and unvarnished, was so uncharacteristic of Gregory Richardson that it momentarily silenced me. "We've spent our entire careers building a reputation for reliability and excellence," my mother added quietly. The thought of missing those meetings, of disappointing clients who had flown in specifically to meet with us. We panicked and made the wrong choice. "And that choice was to leave me behind," I stated, not as an accusation but as a simple fact. My father nodded, unable to meet my eyes. "Yes." The simple acknowledgement hung in the air between us, perhaps the most honest moment we'd shared in years. What I still don't understand, I continued, is why you didn't call once you landed. Why your first messages were demands and accusations rather than concern. My parents exchanged uncomfortable glances. It was my mother who finally answered. Pride, she admitted. Admitting we'd left our own daughter behind was humiliating. So we convinced ourselves it was somehow your fault, that you'd wandered off or missed the boarding announcements. It was easier to be angry than ashamed, my father added. Not better, not right, just easier. I let their words sink in, searching for the ring of truth. For all their faults, my parents rarely admitted weakness or error. That they were doing so now suggested either genuine remorse or a calculated decision that honesty was their best strategic move. Perhaps both. Where does this leave us? I asked finally. Because I meant what I said earlier. I'm done chasing your approval or trying to fit into the life you planned for me. We don't expect you to, my mother said softly. Today made that abundantly clear. You've built something remarkable entirely on your own terms. We'd like a chance to know the person you've become, my father added. Not as your parents directing your path, but as equals, I suppose. Professional colleagues at minimum. Family, if you're willing to try again. I studied them carefully, these two people who had shaped my life through both their presence and their absence. They had wounded me deeply, yet sitting before me now, they seemed somehow smaller than the towering figures of my childhood. Accomplished professionals, certainly, but also flawed humans capable of terrible mistakes and perhaps genuine growth. I'm not making any promises, I said finally, but I'm open to the possibility of a new dynamic, one based on mutual respect rather than authority and obedience. My father nodded, relief evident in his expression. That's more than we have any right to expect. My mother reached across the table, hesitating before placing her hand near mine, not quite touching, but offering the possibility of connection. Thank you for hearing us out. I glanced at my watch. I need to go. The implementation team is waiting. Of course, my father said, standing. Your professional obligations come first. We understand that better than most, as you pointed out earlier. For the first time that day, his reference to their workaholic tendencies held no defensiveness, only a rueful acknowledgement of a shared trait. As we exited the conference room, I spotted Jackson waiting discreetly at a distance. With a brief nod to my parents, I joined him, leaving them standing together in the hallway, looking simultaneously defeated and hopeful. Productive conversation? Jackson inquired as we walked toward the elevator. Surprisingly so, I admitted. They actually apologized, not perfectly, but sincerely, I think. He nodded thoughtfully. People often need to lose something to recognize its value. Sometimes, permanently, sometimes just long enough to feel the loss. They haven't exactly lost me, I pointed out. Haven't they? He countered gently. The daughter who sought their approval, who muted her own voice to avoid their disapproval. That person is gone. What remains is a confident executive who makes her own decisions. Whether they can build a relationship with this new version of you remains to be seen. As the elevator doors closed, I caught a final glimpse of my parents still standing where I'd left them, looking uncharacteristically uncertain about their next move. For people who had always charted their course with unwavering confidence, this new territory, where they held neither authority nor advantage, was perhaps the greatest challenge they'd ever faced. Whether my parents would ever truly see me remained to be seen. But one thing was certain. I would never again be the forgotten daughter, left behind while others moved forward without me. I had found my own path, and it had led me exactly where I needed to be. The remainder of that first day in Singapore passed in a whirlwind of meetings and introductions. After the board session, I met with the regional implementation team to establish timelines for our new initiatives. These weren't corporate veterans speaking in hypotheticals, but the actual staff who would execute my vision, warehouse managers, logistics coordinators, procurement specialists, and marketing strategists from across Southeast Asia. We've never had a division leader who wanted to meet the operational team so early, commented Raj Mehta, the Singapore warehouse supervisor. Usually, we just receive directives from above. I built my business from the ground up, I explained. I've packed boxes, negotiated with customs officials, and tracked shipments at 3 a.m. Your practical knowledge is invaluable to me. The team's response was immediate and enthusiastic. As we worked through potential challenges and brainstormed solutions, I could feel their initial skepticism about my youth and sudden appointment melting into genuine collaboration. By the time I returned to my hotel that evening, exhaustion had overtaken the adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation with my parents. I ordered room service and collapsed onto the plush sofa, kicking off my heels and letting the events of the day settle around me. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Well, did you face down the dragons? I've been dying of suspense all day." Smiled, typing a reply. "Dragons faced, boardroom survived. Currently consuming victory noodles in my suite," he called immediately. "I want every detail," he demanded when I answered. "Mom and Dad haven't responded to any of my messages, which I'm taking as a sign that something major went down." I recounted the day's events, from my presentation to the board's approval, from my parents' shocked expressions to our private conversation afterward. They actually apologized? Marcus sounded genuinely astonished. Without qualifiers or deflection, are we talking about the same Gregory and Susan Richardson? It wasn't perfect, I admitted, but it seemed genuine. I think seeing me in a position of authority genuinely shocked them into reevaluating their perspective. Or they're playing the long game, Marcus suggested, even the skeptic. Faking contrition to regain influence. I sighed, pushing my half-eaten dinner aside. That's definitely possible. But something felt different, especially with Dad. He seemed, I don't know, I'm almost humbled. Gregory Richardson, humbled? Now I know you're delirious from jet lag, Marcus joked. But seriously, Em, whatever their motives, you stood your ground. I'm proud of you. His words warmed me more than I expected. Marcus had always been supportive, but as the favored child who'd followed our parents' prescribed path, his understanding of my struggles had its limits. Thanks, Marcus. That means a lot. I stifled a yawn. I should sleep. Tomorrow's another full day. Sweet dreams of corporate domination, little sister, he said cheerfully. Keep me posted on the parental situation. After we hung up, I checked my notifications one last time. Among the congratulatory emails from board members and update requests from the implementation team was a message from my mother. Your father and I are staying an extra week in Singapore. If your schedule permits, we'd like to have dinner before we leave. Just the three of us, no business agenda. Your choice of venue and time. The message was brief and straightforward, lacking both the commanding tone and passive-aggressive undertones that typically characterized her communications. I stared at it for several minutes, weighing my response. Finally, I typed, I'll check my calendar and let you know. Thank you for understanding about tonight. It wasn't an acceptance, but it wasn't a rejection either. Like our new relationship, it was tentative, a door left slightly ajar rather than flung open or slammed shut. Morning arrived with sunrise streaming through my floor-to-ceiling windows and a message from Jackson. Site visit to Singapore warehouse. At 9. Car downstairs at 8:30. Breakfast in transit. The next few days fell into a productive rhythm. Mornings were dedicated to site visits, the sprawling warehouse complex, the customs processing facility, the quality control center where artisanal products were authenticated and assessed. Afternoons involved strategic planning with department heads, and evenings were spent reviewing progress and preparing for the next day. Throughout it all, I maintained professional but distant communication with my parents. We exchanged occasional messages about the weather, local restaurants, and Singapore's impressive architecture. neutral topics that avoided both business and personal history. It was the conversational equivalent of a demilitarized zone, carefully established and cautiously maintained by both sides. On my fourth day in Singapore, I was reviewing supplier contracts in my hotel suite when Jackson called. "The local team is impressed with your hands-on approach," he said without preamble. "Especially the warehouse staff. Apparently you spent 3 hours yesterday helping them reorganize the artisanal textiles section." I smiled, glancing down at my still healing paper cut from handling shipping cartons. They were using an inefficient sorting system. It was faster to show them a better method than to explain it. "Most executives would have just issued a directive and moved on," Jackson observed. "Your willingness to get your hands dirty has earned their loyalty already." "It's not about loyalty," I countered. "It's about respect. I respect their expertise and want to learn from them, just as I hope they'll be open to my suggestions." 8. "Refreshing philosophy in corporate leadership," Jackson said approvingly. "But that's not why I called. How are things with your parents?" The abrupt shift in topic caught me off guard. Civil, distant. We're texting about safe topics and pretending the past doesn't exist. And the dinner invitation? I blinked in surprise. "How did you—" "Your mother mentioned it when we crossed paths in the hotel lobby this morning," he explained. "She seemed concerned you hadn't given them an answer yet." I sighed, setting aside the contracts. "I've been busy with actual work. Besides, I'm not sure I'm ready for an entire evening of careful conversation and unspoken tension." "Understandable," Jackson acknowledged. "But may I offer an observation? Avoidance rarely resolves complex situations." "I'm not avoiding them," I protested. "I see them at meetings almost daily." "Professional settings with built-in buffers," he pointed out gently. "Very different from sitting across a dinner table with nowhere to hide." He was right, of course. I'd been using work, legitimate, demanding work, as a shield against deeper engagement with my parents. The irony wasn't lost on me. It was exactly what they had done throughout my childhood. "When did you become so insightful about family dynamics?" I asked, deflecting slightly. There was a pause before Jackson answered, his tone more personal than I'd ever heard from him. "Experience. I spent 15 years climbing the corporate ladder while barely speaking to my own father after a falling out. By the time I was ready to reconcile, he was diagnosed with terminal cancer. We had 6 months to repair what could have been addressed in 15 years. The revelation stunned me. Jackson Ward, always composed and focused on business, had just shared something deeply personal. "I'm sorry," I said softly. "I didn't know." "Few people do," he replied. "I'm not suggesting your situation is identical. Your parents hurt you deeply, and any reconciliation must be on your terms. I'm merely suggesting that intentional avoidance prolongs the inevitable." After we hung up, I stared out at the Singapore skyline, Jackson's words echoing in my mind. Was I avoiding the difficult conversations out of self-protection, or was I unconsciously adopting my parents' emotional playbook, using work as a barrier against vulnerability? Before I could overthink it, I sent a text to my mother. "Dinner tomorrow night, 7 p.m. There's a restaurant called Native on Amoy Street that specializes in local ingredients. I'll make the reservation." Her response came almost immediately. "We'll be there. Thank you, Emily." The following evening, I arrived at Native 15 minutes early, wanting to center myself before my parents arrived. The restaurant was intimate and atmospheric, with natural wood furnishings and botanical displays highlighting the local ingredients featured in their innovative cocktails and cuisine. The hostess led me to a corner table partially screened by potted bamboo, private without being isolated. I'd chosen the venue carefully after consulting with local staff. It was upscale enough to satisfy my parents' tastes, but focused on sustainability and artisanal production, reflecting my own values. Neutral territory that honored both perspectives. at me. Precisely 7 p.m., my parents entered the restaurant. They'd coordinated their outfits as always. My father in a tailored navy suit, my mother in a complimentary silk dress. It was a habit that had once seemed romantic to me, then controlling, and now simply familiar. One of the many patterns that defined Gregory and Susan Richardson as a unit rather than individuals. They spotted me and approached, their expressions carefully composed. As the hostess seated them, I noticed small changes in their demeanor. My father's customary commanding presence seemed muted, while my mother's perfect posture had softened slightly. They looked tired. Humans. "Thank you for suggesting this place," my mother began after they were settled. "It's charming. The chef focuses on locally sourced sustainable ingredients," I explained. "Similar to what I've been implementing in my import business, prioritizing ethical production and environmental responsibility." My father nodded, genuinely interested. "I've been reading about your company since recent events. Your growth metrics are impressive, especially considering the current economic climate." The acknowledgement, professional respect without condescension, felt like a small victory. "Thank you," I said simply. "It hasn't been easy, but it's been fulfilling." An awkward silence descended as we studied our menus. When the waiter arrived to take our orders, my parents deferred to my recommendations, another subtle shift in our dynamic. Typically, my father would have taken charge, ordering for the table without consultation. As we waited for our first course, my mother attempted small talk about Singapore's architecture and gardens. I participated politely, but the conversation felt stilted, weighted with everything we weren't saying. Finally, after our appetizers arrived, my father set down his fork and looked directly at me. "This isn't working," he stated plainly. "We're dancing around the elephant in the room, and it's exhausting for everyone." My mother shot him a warning glance, but he continued. "We hurt you, Emily. Not just at the airport, but for years before that. We dismissed your choices, undervalued your achievements, and generally failed to see you for who you are, rather than who we wanted you to be." The blunt acknowledgement, delivered in the same direct tone he used for legal arguments, left me momentarily speechless. "What your father is trying to say," my mother interjected, her voice gentler, "is that we've been doing a lot of thinking since the board meeting about our relationship with you and the role we played in damaging it. We were wrong," my father added simply. "Not just about your career potential, that's been made abundantly clear, but about what success actually looks like. We measured it in titles and billable hours and corner offices, while you measured it in ethical impact, personal fulfillment, and genuine relationships," my mother finished. "And looking at the results objectively, your metrics appear more valid than ours." I studied them carefully, searching for signs of manipulation or insincerity, but all I saw were two accomplished professionals humbled by the recognition of a significant miscalculation, and perhaps the beginnings of genuine regret. "Why now?" I asked finally. "Is it because I suddenly have a position you respect? Would this conversation be happening if I were still running my little import business without the global nexus connection?" My parents exchanged uncomfortable glances. It was my mother who answered. "That's a fair question," she acknowledged. "And I'd like to say we would have reached this realization eventually, but I'm not sure that's true. Sometimes it takes a seismic shift to force reevaluation." "Being left at the airport was painful," I said quietly. "But it wasn't surprising. It was consistent with how you've always prioritized your careers over everything else, including me." My father winced visibly. "We told ourselves we were setting an example of excellence and dedication, that the material security and opportunities we provided compensated for our emotional absence. But watching you this week," my mother continued, "seeing how you connect with your team, how you balance professional excellence with genuine care for the people around you. It's made us question the example we actually set. Our main courses arrived, creating a natural pause in the conversation. As we began eating, I considered their words carefully. There was an authenticity to their discomfort that couldn't be easily faked, especially by people accustomed to projecting nothing but absolute confidence. "I don't know if I can forgive you yet," I said finally. "Not just for the airport incident, but for the years of dismissal before that. But I'm willing to try building something new. A relationship based on who we actually are, not who anyone thinks we should be." My father nodded slowly. "That's more than we deserve, but we'll take it. No expectations, no demands. Just a request," my mother added quietly, "that you give us the chance to know you, the real you, not the version we tried to mold." "I can do that," I agreed. "It goes both ways, though. I've spent my life seeing you primarily as authority figures, not as complex individuals with your own struggles and successes." For the first time that evening, genuine warmth crept into my mother's smile. "I think we'd like that very much." The remainder of dinner flowed more naturally. We avoided any detailed discussion of the past, focusing instead on the present, my impressions of Singapore, their experiences in the city, observations about cultural differences in business practices. Not deep or revelatory, but authentic rather than performative. As we waited for dessert, my father surprised me with a question about my import business. Not the Global Nexus division, but my original small company that had grown from nothing. But determination and vision. "What was the turning point?" he asked. "When did you know it would succeed despite the challenges?" The question was genuinely curious, free from the judgment I'd grown accustomed to hearing in his voice. I told him about the first major contract I'd secured with a boutique hotel chain. The sleepless nights ensuring every detail was perfect. The pride I'd felt seeing my carefully sourced items displayed in their lobbies. My mother listened intently, asking thoughtful follow-up questions about my sourcing ethics and relationships with artisans. For perhaps the first time, they were engaging with my work on its own terms, not comparing it to their predetermined notion of success. When dinner concluded and we stood outside the restaurant waiting for our respective cars, an awkward moment arose. Should we shake hands? Hug? Simply nod professionally? My mother solved the dilemma by reaching out hesitantly, her hand stopping short of actually touching my arm. This was illuminating. "Thank you for giving us this opportunity." "Yes," my father agreed, uncharacteristically subdued. "Perhaps we could do it again before you leave Singapore." I considered their request. The evening had been draining, but also strangely cathartic. Not a resolution, but perhaps the beginning of a path toward one. "I'd like that," I said finally. "My schedule is tight, but I'll make time." As their car arrived first, I watched them slide into the back seat, my father's hand resting supportively on my mother's back, a gesture of unity I'd seen countless times throughout my childhood. But for once, it didn't feel like them aligning against me, but simply two people supporting each other through a difficult but necessary evolution. My own car arrived moments later. As I settled into the leather seat, my phone buzzed with a text from Jackson. "How was dinner with the dragons?" I smiled slightly at his use of Marcus's term. "Less fire-breathing than expected," I replied. "More like wounded creatures learning a new way to exist." His response came quickly. "Evolution is rarely comfortable, but often necessary. Get some rest. Big day tomorrow." As the car wound through Singapore's illuminated streets, I reflected on the strangeness of my journey. 1 month ago, I'd stood, abandoned in an airport terminal, hurt and angry, but ultimately liberated from the need for parental approval. Now I sat in a luxury vehicle, a corporate executive with more professional authority than I'd ever imagined, and tentatively reconnecting with the very people whose rejection had set everything in motion. Life's strange symmetry hadn't escaped me. My parents had left me behind, creating the opening for me to forge a new path. That path had led me back to them, not as their forgotten daughter, but as someone they needed to see clearly for perhaps the first time. Tomorrow would bring more meetings, more strategic decisions, more steps toward implementing my vision for Global Nexus. But tonight had been about something more fundamental, the first tentative steps toward redefining a relationship that had shaped me in ways both painful and profound. Whether those steps would lead to genuine healing or merely a more sophisticated form of mutual disappointment remained to be seen. But for the first time in years, I felt neither the desperate need for their approval nor the burning resentment of their dismissal. Just a quiet curiosity about who we might become to each other if we could all leave our old roles behind. The morning after dinner with my parents, I woke with a strange sense of lightness. Nothing had been resolved completely, but acknowledging the dysfunction that had characterized our relationship for so long felt like setting down a heavy burden I'd carried for years. My schedule that day was particularly demanding. A morning, video conference with European suppliers, followed by site visits to 3 potential new warehouse locations on Singapore's outskirts. As I prepared for the day, my phone buzzed with a text from my father. "Your mother and I are meeting with the Asia-Pacific legal team this morning to review compliance procedures for the new import initiatives. Any specific concerns you'd like us to address?" The message was purely professional, focused on our work intersection rather than personal matters. Yet there was something different in its tone, a genuine request for input rather than a statement of what would be done. A small shift, but significant. I responded with several regulatory questions that had arisen during my supplier meetings, adding, "Thanks for handling this. Your expertise in international trade compliance is exactly what we need." It was an olive branch of sorts, professional respect freely given, and it felt right. We might never have the warm, effortless parent-child relationship depicted in holiday movies, but perhaps we could build something meaningful within the parameters of who we actually were, driven professionals with a complicated personal history. The video conference with European suppliers went smoothly, with several artisanal textile producers expressing enthusiasm about our proposed ethical sourcing initiative. As their faces appeared on screen from workshops in Portugal, Romania, and Croatia, I was struck by how global business had become and how technology could connect people across vast distances when used thoughtfully. By midday, I was touring potential warehouse sites with Lian Chen, the logistics director for Southeast Asia. The current facility was operating at near capacity, and my expansion plans required additional space for artisanal products that needed specialized storage conditions. "This one has the best access to shipping routes," Lian explained as we walked through a cavernous space near the port. "But the climate control systems would need significant upgrades for your textile and woodcraft storage requirements." I examined the support beams and ceiling height, mentally calculating modification costs. "What about the former tech manufacturing facility we passed earlier? It already has separate climate zones and security features." Lian looked impressed. "You noticed that? Most executives wouldn't pick up on those details during a drive-by." I smiled. "I've spent more time in warehouses than boardrooms. The devil's always in the details with storage facilities." As we continued our tour, my phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from my mother, copying me on detailed notes from their legal team meeting. Her summary was thorough and insightful, highlighting potential regulatory challenges with specific Southeast Asian markets and suggesting practical solutions. At the end, she'd added a personal note. "Your father and I were impressed by the comprehensive groundwork you've laid for these initiatives. The sourcing ethics framework is particularly well conceived." The comment caught me off guard. It wasn't effusive praise. The Richardsons didn't do effusive. But it was genuine professional respect, acknowledging the value of work I'd built from scratch. "Good news?" Lian asked, noticing my expression. "Just some helpful legal insights," I replied, tucking my phone away. let's look at that tech facility again. I think it might be our best option. By late afternoon, we'd selected the former tech manufacturing warehouse as our expansion site. I authorized the preliminary paperwork, feeling a surge of satisfaction as I signed my name as division president, a tangible demonstration of how far I'd come in just 1 month. When I returned to the hotel, Jackson was waiting in the lobby, engaged in conversation with several board members who had remained in Singapore after the meeting. "Emily," he called, waving me over. "Perfect timing. We were just discussing your supplier diversity initiative." As I joined the group, I noticed my parents seated in the lobby bar, watching our interaction from a distance. My father raised his glass slightly in acknowledgement when our eyes met, a gesture that felt supportive rather than evaluative. The impromptu meeting with Jackson and the board members stretched through the early evening, with genuine enthusiasm building around my proposal to partner with previously overlooked artisan communities. By the time we concluded, I was energized by their support and eager to begin implementation. As the board members dispersed, Jackson remained. "Productive day?" "Very," I confirmed. We secured the warehouse expansion site, finalized 3 new supplier contracts, and the European artisans are on board with our ethical certification process. He nodded approvingly. "You've accomplished more in 5 days than most executives manage in a month. The team is responding exceptionally well to your leadership style." I glanced toward the bar, where my parents were still seated, now engaged, in conversation with Catherine Montrose, the CFO. They contributed too. Their legal guidance on the compliance framework was actually quite valuable. Jackson followed my gaze. "Professional collaboration can sometimes be a bridge to personal reconciliation. Speaking of which, your mother mentioned you might join them for dinner again before leaving Singapore?" "We're trying," I said simply. "It's a work in progress." "Most worthwhile things are," he observed. "I'm heading back to San Francisco tomorrow, but the executive team will remain at your disposal. I have complete confidence in your ability to finish establishing the foundation here." His vote of confidence warmed me. Unlike my parents' approval, which I'd craved for so long, Jackson's felt earned rather than granted, based on observable results rather than familial obligation. "Thank you for the opportunity," I said sincerely, "and for seeing potential where others didn't." He smiled slightly. "That's the core of good business, recognizing untapped value. You'll do the same for someone else someday." After Jackson left, I considered joining my parents at the bar but decided against it. The day had been productive but draining, and I needed time to process everything that had happened. Instead, I sent a text to my mother. "Saw your email. Thanks for the thorough analysis. Would you and Dad be available for dinner tomorrow night? There's a rooftop restaurant at Marina Bay Sands I'd like to try." Her response came quickly. "We'd enjoy that. 7:30 work for you?" Such a simple exchange, yet so different from our communication patterns before. No demands, no passive-aggressive undertones, just straightforward plans between adults. The next day brought another round of meetings and decisions, now without Jackson's guiding presence. I found myself naturally stepping into the leadership void, directing discussions and making final calls on implementation timelines. The transition felt seamless, as if I'd been preparing for this role my entire life. Perhaps in some ways I had been. During a brief break between meetings, I received a text from my father. "Your compliance framework presentation to the legal team was exceptionally well received. Several associates asked for additional resources on your ethical sourcing guidelines. You've made quite an impression." The praise was specific and professional rather than generic, acknowledging particular aspects of my work rather than offering blanket approval. It felt genuine in a way that "we're proud of you" never had from my parents. That evening, I arrived at the rooftop restaurant slightly early, taking a moment to appreciate the spectacular view of Singapore's skyline illuminated against the night sky. The host led me to a prime table overlooking gardens by the bay, its futuristic super trees glowing with colorful lights in the distance. My parents arrived precisely on time, as always. But unlike our previous dinner, there was less tension in their posture, less careful calculation in their expressions. My mother had even dressed more casually than usual, wearing a simple silk blouse rather than her typical formal attire. "This view is remarkable," my father commented as they joined me. "Good choice. I asked the local team for recommendations," I explained. "They suggested this place for the panorama of the gardens." "Your team seems very responsive," my mother observed. "They clearly respect you already." I nodded, accepting the observation for what it was: professional acknowledgement rather than personal manipulation. They're incredibly knowledgeable about the local market. I've learned as much from them as they have from me. That collaborative approach is why they're responding so positively, my father noted. Most new executives arrive with preconceived notions rather than listening first. Coming from Gregory Richardson, known for his top-down management style, this recognition of a different leadership approach felt significant. As we ordered drinks and appetizers, the conversation flowed more naturally than before. We discussed Singapore's impressive urban planning, the culinary traditions we'd experienced, and the cultural differences in business practices we'd observed. It wasn't deeply personal, but it was genuine. Three professionals sharing observations without agenda or pretense. When our main courses arrived, my mother steered the conversation in a new direction. "Your brother called this morning. He's quite concerned about us all being together in Singapore without him as a buffer." I laughed despite myself. "Marcus always did play peacekeeper." "He shouldn't have had to," my father said quietly. "We put him in that position by creating an environment where intervention was necessary." The candidness of his self-criticism startled me. Gregory Richardson admitting, "Fault was as rare as snow in Singapore. We've been talking, your father and I," my mother continued, "about patterns we established years ago that became so ingrained we stopped questioning them. About the roles we assigned within the family without even realizing we were doing it. Marcus, the perfect law student. Me, the disappointment who needed correction," I observed, more matter-of-fact than bitter. My father winced. "Those aren't the labels we would have used, but in effect, yes. We channeled Marcus toward a path we understood, while attempting to redirect you from one we didn't." The irony being that Marcus is deeply ambivalent about his legal career, my mother added, surprising me with this revelation. "He's exceptional at it, but it doesn't fulfill him the way your work clearly fulfills you." This was news to me. Marcus had always seemed contentedly established in his law firm partnership. "He's never said anything." "He wouldn't," my father acknowledged. "He internalized our expectations so completely that disappointing us became unthinkable for him. Unlike you, who had the courage to chart your own course despite our disapproval." The observation hung between us, not quite an apology, but a recognition that my rebellion had perhaps been healthier than Marcus's compliance. "We did a disservice to you both," my mother said softly. "In different ways." I considered their words carefully. "Why are you telling me this now?" They exchanged glances. That silent communication I'd always found so excluding as a child now seemed less like a united front against me, and more like two people seeking support from each other during a difficult conversation. "Because we're trying to be honest," my father replied finally. "With you, with ourselves. This past week has been illuminating in ways we didn't expect." "Seeing you in your professional element," my mother elaborated, "watching how naturally leadership comes to you when you're pursuing work that genuinely matters to you. It's forced us to question many of our assumptions." "About me?" I asked. "About success," my father clarified. "About what constitutes a life well lived, about the cost of pursuing external validation at the expense of internal fulfillment." was perhaps the most introspective statement I'd ever heard from Gregory Richardson, a man who had built his career on projecting absolute certainty. "We're not asking for forgiveness," my mother added, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant, "or even understanding, just the opportunity to evolve beyond the dysfunctional patterns we established." I studied them both, these accomplished, driven people who had shaped my life in ways both constructive and damaging. For the first time, I could see them not as all-powerful authorities, but as complex individuals navigating their own imperfect paths. "I think we're already doing that," I said finally. This conversation would have been unimaginable a month ago. Relief flickered across my father's features. "It's a start." The remainder of dinner unfolded with a new quality to our interaction. Not the forced cordiality of our first meal together, but something more authentic. We discussed our respective work with genuine interest, shared observations about industry trends, and even ventured into personal territory with cautious questions about each other's daily lives beyond professional accomplishments. As dessert arrived, my mother surprised me with a question that had nothing to do with business or achievement. "Are you happy, Emily? Not successful, we can see that you are, but actually content with your life's direction." The question was so unexpected, so removed from the performance metrics that had always defined Richardson family discussions, that it momentarily rendered me speechless. Yes, I said finally. "The work challenges me in ways that matter. I'm building something meaningful on my own terms, and I'm surrounded by people who value my contributions for what they are, not what they could be if I were someone else." My father nodded slowly, absorbing my words. "That's more important than we understood for most of our careers. We measured success by external validation, client rosters, firm rankings, billable hours. It's only recently we've begun questioning whether those were the right metrics." "What prompted that questioning?" I asked, genuinely curious about this shift in their perspective. My parents exchanged another glance before my mother answered. "Age, partly. Reaching professional pinnacles only to find them less fulfilling than anticipated. And watching how differently you approach your work, with passion rather than obligation." "The airport incident crystallized something we'd been avoiding confronting," my father added. "That in pursuit of professional perfection, we'd damaged the relationships that actually give life meaning." It was the closest they had come to directly addressing their abandonment of me, and I could see the genuine regret in his expression. "I won't pretend that didn't hurt," I said carefully. "Being left behind like excess baggage. But in a strange way, it was also liberating. It forced me to stop seeking your approval and start trusting my own judgment. Sometimes the worst moments create unexpected openings," my mother observed quietly. "Though that doesn't excuse our actions." "No, it doesn't," I agreed. "But it does put them in perspective. Your leaving me at that airport led directly to this moment, to professional opportunities I might never have found otherwise, and perhaps to a more honest relationship between us." As we concluded our dinner and waited for the elevator down from the rooftop, my father hesitantly broached a new topic. "Your mother and I will be returning to Boston the day after tomorrow. We've extended our stay as long as possible, but client obligations require our presence." I nodded, unsurprised. Work would always be central to who they were. "When will you return to the States?" my mother asked. "Another week at least," I replied. "There's still much to establish here before I can transition to managing remotely." "Would you consider having dinner with us in Boston when you return?" my father asked, uncharacteristic uncertainty in his tone. "Perhaps with Marcus as well, a family dinner of sorts." The invitation touched me more deeply than I had expected. Not because I desperately wanted a family dinner, but because the request itself acknowledged something my parents had rarely demonstrated, that my presence at their table was desired rather than expected. "I'd like that," I said simply. "I'll text you when my travel plans are finalized." As we exited the elevator into the hotel lobby, An awkward moment arose, the same uncertainty about appropriate farewell gestures that had characterized our previous dinner. This time, however, my mother moved first, stepping forward to embrace me briefly. The hug was slightly stiff, unpracticed. We had never been a physically demonstrative family, but the intent behind it felt genuine. My father followed with an equally awkward but sincere embrace. "We're proud of you, Emily," he said quietly. "Not because of your title or who you report to, but because of the person you've become, despite our mistakes." The words were simple but profound, coming from a man who had spent most of my life measuring worth through professional achievements. "Thank you," I replied, finding I meant it. "I'll see you both tomorrow at the legal briefing." As they walked away toward the elevators, I watched them with new eyes. Not as the imposing figures who had dominated my childhood, but as two accomplished, flawed individuals approaching the latter phases of their careers with newly awakened questions about what truly mattered. I wasn't naive enough to believe that our relationship was miraculously healed, or that decades of dysfunctional patterns could be undone in a few meals. But something had shifted fundamentally. A door had opened to the possibility of a different kind of connection, one based on mutual respect rather than authority and submission. My phone buzzed with a message from the warehouse team, requesting my input on an inventory categorization system for the new facility. As I composed my response, I felt a profound sense of alignment between my personal and professional worlds, both undergoing transformation simultaneously, both requiring patience, clear vision, and the courage to build something new upon imperfect foundations. 1 month ago, watching my parents' plane depart without me had felt like the ultimate rejection. Now I understood it had actually been the catalyst for my liberation, not just professionally, but from the desperate need for validation that had defined my relationship with them for 3 decades. Whatever came next, we would be meeting as equals, not in title or experience, but in the fundamental right to define success on our own terms. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.